Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Security Operations Centers.
The SOC.
The SOC. You know, if you're in the cybersecurity space, you probably know all about SOCs, but we're aiming this one at people who don't know the ins and outs of a SOC, but are really interested to understand how they work. It's one of those topics that you read the definition and you think you understand it, but, there's a lot more to it than just the simple definition.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using a couple of really great sources. We have the SANS Institute and IDERI. They both have some great guidance on what SOCs are and how they work. And then we have the results of the SANS 2023 SOC survey.
Yeah, a lot of practical guidance in those sources.
Super practical stuff from the experts and from people in the trenches. So by the end of this, you'll be able to hold your own in a conversation about SOCs. You'll know what makes them tick, what technologies they use, the challenges they face, and how they constantly strive to improve.
Yeah, it's a constantly evolving world.
It really is.
Yeah.
So let's dive right in. What is a SOC? I mean, we see the acronym everywhere. We kind of have a vague idea, but what is it really?
A security operations center is kind of like the central nervous system for an organization's cyber defenses.
Yeah.
It's a dedicated team.
A team of people.
Yeah, a team of people that is continuously watching, analyzing, and responding to security threats.
It's a 24/7 kind of thing.
Pretty much, yeah, 24/7.
All right, so if something happens in the middle of the night on a server somewhere in the world, the SOC knows about it.
Well, hopefully.
Yeah.
That's the goal. So they are the operational command center, if you will.
Okay.
For detecting, understanding, and then dealing with security incidents. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, they exist to satisfy the organization's cyber monitoring and defense needs.
It seems like it must be incredibly difficult.
It is.
You know, it's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they're dealing with these massive quantities of data, security-related data.
Right.
And the challenge is not just collecting the data. It's having the right data at the right time and understanding what that data means.
Right.
In the context of the organization's operations.
And it's not just like one magic tool that makes all of this happen, right?
Right. Virtually every mature SOC that you'll find is going to be employing several different technologies all working together.
Okay. And then we have also traditional SOCs versus next-gen SOCs.
Right. So we've seen a pretty significant evolution. You know, back in the day, it was a lot more manual processes. Right. Analysts manually sifting through logs, using, more rudimentary tools for responding to incidents. But now we're talking about next generation SOCs. Yeah. Where they're leveraging artificial intelligence, automation, all this stuff to proactively identify and respond to threats much more effectively.
Right. So moving from a reactive to more of a proactive, like we're going to find these threats before they even.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the goal.
Okay. So let's break down then. Okay.
What actually happens in SOC? Yeah. Like, what are the key functions and processes?
Well, I'll tell you. Typically starts with data collection.
Okay.
This is where the SOC gathers all the information it needs to identify potential problems. And we're talking everything from logs on computers, servers, all that stuff, to the metadata about traffic flowing over the network.
Right.
Essentially anything that might indicate a security issue.
And this data needs to be analyzed somewhere, right?
It does. And that somewhere is ideally what's called a SIEM.
Okay.
Which stands for Security Information and Event Management System. And that platform is designed to correlate and analyze these massive amounts of data that we were talking about.
So you know how we talked about the importance of context?
Yeah.
This is where that really comes in.
It is. The SOC needs to figure out what security scenarios they're really worried about. These are called use cases.
And then they got to figure out which data sources would actually give them early warning signs of an attack that's related to one of those use cases.
Okay, so they need to have a plan in place. Like, if this happens, we need to be looking at this data.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's part of the setup and configuration of the SIEM.
Okay, so what kind of data are we actually talking about here? Like, what are they actually monitoring?
So, you think about network security monitoring.
Okay.
You might be capturing full network packets.
Right.
This is like PCCAP data for deep analysis. Okay. Or you might just be looking at the metadata. Okay. So who's communicating with whom, when, for how long, using what protocols. Okay. Then you have endpoint monitoring data. This is coming from individual devices like your laptop, your desktop, your servers, and this includes logs.
Oh, wow.
And these logs record details about every program that's executed.
Like every single program?
Yeah, like everything. It's crazy.
Oh, wow. Okay, so like if I open up, I don't know, Notepad on my work computer, that's logged somewhere.
It is.
Oh, wow.
And not just that it was open, but things like what command line was used to open it, the name of the program, the digital fingerprint, the hash of the file, all that's recorded.
Oh my gosh.
And then they're tracking script execution. So things like PowerShell on Windows or shell scripts on Linux.
Oh.
Authentication attempts, successful and failed logins.
Yeah.
Any configuration changes to systems, the status of known vulnerabilities.
Right.
And any network traffic that deviates from the norm.
Okay.
Like connections to unusual ports or weird geographic locations.
Wow, okay.
So it's really comprehensive.
Yeah. Can you give me like an example of like an actual log source that they're pulling this information from?
Yeah, so like on a Windows system, for example.
Okay.
SOC might be pulling logs from things like AppLocker.
Mm-hmm.
This controls what applications can run.
Okay.
Device Guard, which helps prevent untrusted code from executing.
Okay.
PowerShell logs, which can reveal malicious scripts.
Yeah.
SIEMs, which is a super powerful tool for logging detailed system activity.
Yeah.
Windows Defender logs for antivirus information, and the Windows Firewall logs tracking network connections.
So all this information is coming in, and within these logs, there are these specific events. Are there certain events that are like red flags?
Oh, yeah. There are specific event IDs within those logs.
Okay.
That are often like really strong indicators that something malicious might be happening.
Okay, so they're looking for those specifically.
Okay.
What about on like Linux or Unix systems?
So on Linux and Unix,
okay,
you have critical log files like varlogauth.log or varlog secure for tracking authentication events, varlog say log or varlog messages for a broad overview of system activity and logs that are specific to firewalls, like imptables or firewalls.
Right.
And then web server logs, things like Apache or Jinx.
And so much of, what we talk about in cybersecurity is in the cloud now, AWS and Azure and Google Cloud.
Yeah, a lot of it's moving that way.
How does logging work in those environments? Because that's different, right?
It is different. So for IA, infrastructure as a service, the logging is often pretty similar to what you'd see on premises.
Okay.
You might still be using agents installed on virtual machines to collect those logs and forward them to the SIEM. But with PaaS and SaaS, platform as a service and software as a service, it gets a little trickier. Cloud providers typically have their own logging capabilities. They might offer APIs or they might write service logs to designated storage areas within their platform, like S3 buckets in AWS or Azure Event Hub.
And then the SOC has to...
Yeah, the SOC has to configure their SIEM to be able to ingest those logs automatically. And the focus shifts a little bit. You're looking more at service level activity and user interactions. And one thing to remember with SaaS especially is that what logs you can get and how granular they are is really up to the vendor.
Okay, so the SOC is limited by what the vendor is providing them. Exactly.
Okay, so they've got all this data and they're pulling it in and they're sorting it and they're using context. What happens next?
So the next stage is detection.
Okay.
And the main goal here is to accurately identify those potential attacks.
Yeah.
So you want to flag the genuine threats while minimizing those false alarms because,
false positives.
False positives can just overwhelm analysts.
Right.
So detection happens through two main approaches. You got reactive detection and proactive detection.
Okay. So reactive detection is kind of like, something happened. Let's check it out.
It's more like the SIEM or your network and endpoint sensors are automatically triggering alerts when they see suspicious patterns. So it's happening in real time.
Okay, so they see something and they're like, whoa, that's weird.
Yeah, and they fire off an alert.
Okay. And proactive detection is a little bit different then. Yeah, proactive detection is where the analysts are actually actively hunting through the data.
Yeah.
They're looking for those anomalies or indicators of compromise that the automated systems might have missed.
Right. Okay, so we've got reactive and we have proactive. And what's the end goal for this detection stage?
Ultimately, you want a really accurate alert.
Right, a true positive.
A true positive, that's what they call it.
Okay.
About truly malicious activity that gets put into a queue for the security team to actually investigate.
Okay, so now we've got this queue of alerts and the SOC team's looking at them. What happens next?
So the next stage is investigation.
Yeah.
And this is where the SOC analysts take those alerts and they try to figure out if it's a real security incident or not.
Okay.
And a lot of SOCs are dealing with just a crazy amount of alerts.
Yeah.
And a lot of those are false positives. Maybe the detection rules were too sensitive or they weren't tuned properly.
Okay.
So this investigation stage is super important.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like a fire alarm going off. You don't know if it's a real fire or if someone just burned toast.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the analysts have to take that initial alert and they combine it with any other data they can gather.
Okay.
This could be from other security tools, different log sources, maybe even publicly available threat intelligence.
Okay, so they're trying to get the full picture.
Right, and they use that to decide if a real attack is actually underway.
Okay.
And if it turns out to be a false positive, it's really important for those analysts to understand why that alert was triggered in the first place.
Yeah.
And they have to provide that feedback to the detection engineering team.
Right.
So they can refine the alerting rules and reduce those false positives in the future.
So it's a constant learning process.
It is.
Okay, that makes sense.
And a structured approach to analysis is key here.
Okay.
Make sure they're being accurate and not wasting time chasing those false alarms.
Okay, so what happens then if they've done their investigation
Right.
and they're like, oh no, this is a genuine threat?
That's when it gets escalated to incident response.
Okay.
This is where they actually take action.
Okay.
And the main goals here are, first, you got to understand the scope of the incident.
Okay, so how bad is it?
How many systems are affected? How many users? What's the blast radius?
Yeah.
Then you have to contain it to prevent further damage.
Right.
And then you have to get rid of the threat completely.
Right.
Eradicate it and get those systems back up and running with as little disruption as possible.
And this could be anything from like a single computer that got infected with something to like a massive data breach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could be a single infected laptop.
Right.
Or it could be a huge data breach that requires extensive forensic analysis.
Yeah.
Maybe even involving law enforcement. It really depends on the situation.
And I imagine that having all that data centralized in the SIEM really helps them here.
It does. Tools like EDR and NDR, endpoint detection and response and network detection and response, those are super helpful because they integrate with the SIEM.
Okay.
They allow the analyst to quickly query the data, figure out the timeline of the incident, and take swift action to contain and remediate the threat.
Okay, so once the incident is resolved and everything's back to normal, is that the end of it?
Not quite. There's a crucial final step, which we call the post-incident phase.
Okay.
So once the incident's handled, the analysts close out the corresponding ticket in their incident management system.
Okay.
And a really important part of this phase is classifying that incident.
Okay, like putting it into a bucket.
Yeah, like categorizing it.
Yeah.
Was it malware? Was it phishing? Whatever it was.
Right.
This allows them to track key metrics, which can then provide feedback.
Okay.
So the SOC managers can analyze those trends, see if there are any recurring issues, maybe weaknesses in their defenses, and then make informed decisions about where they should be focusing their resources.
So it's always a learning experience.
It has to be.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so we've talked about the SIEM quite a bit. What are some of the other key technologies and tools that the SOC uses?
So alongside the SIEM, a really critical tool is EDR.
Okay.
Endpoint detection and response.
Right.
So the SIEM provides that broad view, aggregating logs from all these different sources.
Okay.
But EDR focuses specifically on individual endpoints.
Okay, so my laptop would be an endpoint.
Exactly. Laptops, desktops, servers.
Okay.
And EDR's core capabilities revolve around detecting and responding to incidents right on those devices.
Okay.
So it's a little bit more granular.
Right.
And it often includes automation features.
Okay.
So you can automatically quarantine an infected machine.
Okay.
Or deploy patches.
Gotcha.
So for example, if you have a ransomware attack,
yeah,
EDR can quickly identify those infected endpoints,
right,
isolate them from the network to prevent the spread.
So it's like damage control.
Exactly, yeah. Damage control.
Okay.
And it can potentially even help recover those encrypted files by using backups or shadow copies.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So having that visibility at the endpoint level is really important for catching threats that might slip past your network level security.
Okay. And then we have XDR, extended detection and response.
Right. So XDR is kind of like, think of it as a step up from SIEM and EDR.
Okay.
It's a more unified, holistic approach to security.
Okay.
It integrates data from a much wider range of sources.
So it's taking in even more information.
It is. Network traffic, endpoints, servers, email systems, cloud environments, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so it's everything.
It's trying to get everything.
Yeah.
And all that gets brought into a single platform.
Okay.
So you have this much richer context, and that enables more effective threat detection and response.
Okay.
Because now you can correlate events that might seem unrelated across different security layers.
Oh, that makes sense.
So instead of just investigating alerts from your different tools in isolation, you're getting a unified picture of what might be a complex multi-stage attack. And that allows you to respond much faster and in a more coordinated way.
Yeah. Okay. So give me like a real world example.
Okay. Imagine you have a phishing email that leads to a compromised endpoint.
Right.
Which then tries to move laterally across the network.
Okay.
Now, a traditional SIEM might just see that email and some unusual network activity.
Okay.
EDR might flag some suspicious stuff on the endpoint.
Right.
But XDR, because it can connect those docs across the email, the endpoint, and the network data, can give you a much clearer indication of a sophisticated attack in progress.
Okay.
And because you see it earlier, you can take a more decisive and impactful response.
So it's all about connecting the dots.
Exactly. Connecting the dots.
Okay. So we have SIEM, EDR, XDR. What if a company just doesn't have the resources to run a SOC in-house? Is that where MDR comes in?
It is. MDR, Managed Detection and Response.
Okay.
That's basically outsourcing your security. You have a third-party provider, and they're offering continuous monitoring, threat detection, and incident response capabilities.
So they're basically doing the SOC's job.
Right. And it's a really good option for companies that want to improve their security, but they just don't have the resources.
Right.
Or people with the right skills to build and maintain their own SOC.
Yeah. I mean, hiring is a huge problem in cyber right now.
It is.
Yeah.
And these MDR providers have their own teams of security experts.
Okay.
They use advanced technologies. They provide 204/7 monitoring and response.
Okay.
You know, we've seen a lot of mid-sized companies who have been really successful partnering with these MDR providers.
Right. So they're getting the expertise they wouldn't have otherwise.
They are. They're improving their security. They're getting access to expertise and tools that would just be way too expensive to do on their own.
Yeah, that makes sense. So MDR is kind of like outsourcing the human element of the SOC. What about automating tasks within an existing SOC?
So for that, we have SOR, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response platforms.
Yeah.
And these platforms are all about streamlining and automating those security operations.
Okay.
So they let security teams define automated workflows or playbooks.
Okay.
And these playbooks can handle those repetitive tasks involved in incident response, threat analysis, and other security processes.
Okay, so it's like, if this, then that.
Yeah, basically. So, for example, if a certain type of phishing email is detected, the SO playbook could automatically isolate that user's account.
Okay.
Scan their machine for malware, and notify the security team.
Okay, so it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah, it's all automated.
And the analysts don't have to do it manually.
Exactly. So it speeds up the response time significantly.
Yeah.
And it frees up those analysts to focus on the more complex tasks that require human judgment.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. And then we have threat intelligence. We kind of have to talk about threat intelligence.
Yeah, talk about a SOC without talking about threat intelligence.
Right. So how does that fit in?
So threat intelligence is all about providing context.
Right.
It's about collecting, processing, and analyzing information about the bad guys.
Yeah.
Their motivations, their attack methods, what we call TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, and IOCs, indicators of compromise.
Okay.
And then you use that information to improve your defenses.
Right.
So you might integrate threat intelligence feeds into the SIEM or other security tools to block known bad stuff. You can use it for what they call adversary attribution.
Okay.
So linking malicious activity to a specific group.
Right. Like, oh, we know this group likes to do this.
Exactly. And that helps you understand their goals, how persistent they might be.
Okay.
And it's interesting. The SANS survey showed that more and more companies are outsourcing at least part of their threat intelligence operations.
Okay.
It's probably because it takes a lot of specialized skills and resources to do it effectively.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like every part of security is getting more and more specialized.
It really is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. What about AI and machine learning?
The future.
Yeah.
So AI and machine learning, they're becoming more and more important in modern SOCs.
Okay.
Because AI algorithms, they can analyze these huge amounts of data at insane speeds.
Yeah.
They can find patterns, anomalies that human analysts might miss.
Because it's just too much data.
It is.
Yeah.
And machine learning models.
Right.
They can actually learn from the data.
Okay.
And use that to improve the accuracy of threat detection.
Yeah.
Reduce those false positives.
Right.
And even predict future attacks.
Wow.
So, for example, in finance,
okay,
they're using AI-driven threat detection systems to find weird trading patterns.
Okay.
Or account activity that might indicate fraud.
Right.
And a lot of times they can do this in real time.
Wow.
Which allows for immediate intervention to prevent huge financial losses.
Okay, so AI is becoming like a necessity.
It's becoming essential, yeah. Just because of the sheer volume and complexity of the data we're dealing with.
Right. Okay. And then what about compliance?
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, because SOCs have to make sure that they're following all the rules, right?
They do. So there are auditing technologies.
Okay.
And these technologies help automate and streamline compliance monitoring.
Okay.
So they're constantly checking to see if the organization is following the rules,
right?
Whether it's security policies, industry regulations like GDPR or ECI,
like DSS.
PCI DSS, all that.
Yeah.
And these tools often integrate with the SIEM and SOAR to provide real-time visibility into the compliance posture.
Okay.
They can generate audit reports.
Yeah.
And they can even automate some of the remediation actions if they find deviations from the policy.
Okay. So it's not just about detecting threats.
Right.
It's about making sure you're following the rules, too.
It is. You got to do both.
Okay. And I imagine the SOC uses all the other basic security tools that we always talk about, right?
Right. You can't forget about those foundational security controls.
Yeah, like what?
So firewalls are still a cornerstone.
Okay.
They control traffic flow, they detect threats at the perimeter.
Yeah.
And they often do deep packet inspection.
Right.
You've got intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems.
Okay.
So IDS and IPS.
Okay.
These work to identify.
Yeah.
And in the case of IPS, actually block malicious activity on the network.
Okay.
Anti-malware is huge.
Yeah.
You know, it's gone way beyond just traditional antivirus.
Right.
It can detect ransomware, spyware, all those nasty things.
Okay.
You got data loss prevention tools.
Right.
These are essential for preventing sensitive data from leaving the organization.
Okay.
Identity and access management systems, or IAM.
Yeah.
These control who has access to what resources.
Okay.
And of course, encryption.
Yeah.
That's fundamental for protecting the confidentiality of sensitive data, both in transit and at rest.
Right. Right. And security awareness training, right?
Oh, you can't forget about that.
Because that's huge.
It's huge. It's not a technology per se.
Yeah.
But educating employees about common threats, like phishing and social engineering, that's vital.
Right.
It makes them a more vigilant part of the security posture.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about all these amazing technologies, but at the end of the day, it's really the people, right?
It is. Yeah, the technologies provide the foundation, but the people are the most important part of a really good SOC.
Right.
And one of the biggest challenges, the SANS survey highlighted this, is recruiting and retaining qualified staff. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that all the time. Why is it so difficult?
Well, the whole cybersecurity field is facing this huge skills gap.
Yeah.
There's just way more demand for qualified professionals than there are people to fill those roles.
Yeah.
And the survey pointed out something interesting, which is that passion is a really good indicator of success when you're hiring for these roles.
Okay, so you need people who are really into it.
You got to be passionate about it. Yeah. And that makes sense, right?
It does.
Because it's a challenging field. It's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And because there's such a shortage, good SOCs really focus on growing their own talent.
Right.
You know, provide those clear career paths so people can advance within the team.
Yeah. I mean, if they don't see a future there, they're going to go somewhere else.
They're going to go somewhere else.
So what are some of the things that SOCs are doing to keep their employees happy? You know, what are those retention strategies?
Well, obviously, competitive salary is important. You got to pay people what they're worth.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's about creating a positive and inclusive team culture.
Okay.
Where people feel like they belong, they feel valued. You got to give them meaningful work.
Okay.
Work that's intellectually stimulating.
Yeah.
Where they feel like they're actually making a difference.
Right. Making a real impact.
Right. And like we said before, clear career paths and professional development opportunities are huge.
Okay. So they have to see that they can move up.
They have to see a future for themselves there.
Okay. What are some of the common roles then that you would find within a SOC team?
So you'll typically find monitoring analysts.
Okay.
These are kind of like the first responders.
Okay.
They're triaging those incoming alerts.
Yeah.
They're assessing the severity.
Okay.
Then you have general purpose analysts.
Okay.
They handle a broader range of tasks.
Okay.
Deeper investigations.
Yeah.
Initial incident response.
Right.
Maybe some basic forensics or threat intelligence gathering.
Okay. Okay.
Then you have your incident responders.
Yeah.
They specialize in managing and resolving those confirmed security incidents. Mm-hmm. Threat intelligence analysts.
Yeah.
They focus on gathering and analyzing threat information.
Right. Right.
You'll have systems administrators who keep all the technology running.
Yeah.
Junior analysts or interns who are learning the ropes.
Yeah.
And maybe even IT support staff.
Okay. So there's a lot of different roles.
Yeah. It's a pretty diverse team.